Nkosi Tours, one of the leading young groups in the New South Africa, 6 years old, they're bringing about this virtual tour of the Panorama route. We would have had 150 to 250 guests from around the world for the 30th CIRP Design Conference from 5 to 8 May in 2020. Panorama route in the south here at Graskop, going past the Gorge, the Pinnacle, God's Window, Wonder View, Bergsluk and Potholes, the canyon through to 3 rondavels at the end. One of the largest green canyons in the world. Grand Canyon, Fish River Canyon in Namibia, and then this green Grand Canyon here in Mpumalanga, South Africa. The conference members would have been landed at the main gateways. If they landed at OR Tambo in Johannesburg, they would have come west to east along the Panorama, starting in the north at 3 rondavels, coming down to Bergsluk Potholes, then God's Window, the Pinnacle, and down off the edge of the escarpment behind me, down to the conference center in the Lowveld. Should they have entered via the KMI airport and Skukuza airport, they would have done the reverse tour back to Johannesburg. In both cases, traveling with Nkosi Tours, getting to and from. The Panorama route runs along the edge of the escarpment on the western side, and if you're traveling from Johannesburg, you would start in the north at 3 rondavels. These mountain structures remind one of African huts and are actually in memory of the 3 wives of a great warrior of that area, Chief Marepi. He was the man of the day and represented his first, second and third wives. Culturally, African people may have more than one, and if you're a person of note in the tribe, and these would be the Pedi, you would have a first wife which is an arranged marriage. A second wife would be organized through your first wife, probably a younger sister or her best friend. The third or trophy wife would be a young lady that you could go and play with, because the average African lady would produce, a wife would produce 8 to 12 children. So at this stage, number 1 and 2 would be quite happy for you to find somebody else to play with. Then we move on down south, and the next stop along the canyon. By the way, a canyon is cut by a river eroding the soil. A valley is a low area in the landscape. As we move along the Blyde River Canyon, we come to the junction of the Trier and the Blyde Rivers, and at this junction the 2 rivers mixing caused whirlpools, and the loose material have drilled into the soft sandstone and limestone structure, creating these fantastic potholes. All the way along the Panorama route we have numerous waterfalls which you can spend weeks exploring. They have a lot of interesting names. Lone Creek, it sounds like something out of a western. Lisbon Falls, Berlin Falls. Why these strange European names? Very simply, very often the first plantation manager was from that country. Like Lisbon Falls, the plantation manager was Portuguese. Berlin Falls, it was a German, and that is where these names come from. From here on the Panorama route, traveling from west down to east, we would fall down from 1800 meters down to as low as 300 meters into the Kruger National Park. Just on 2 million hectares of old Africa, almost like 200 years ago, except for the roads and the camps and the electrified fence that surrounds it. Interestingly enough, the Greater Kruger these days is in excess of 4 million hectares. But we start back in 1898 with 500,000 hectares declared by Paul Kruger, after whom the park is named, to conserve what was left of the wildlife after commercial and sport hunting. They realized the numbers were dropping. So in 1898, this 500,000 was set aside. After the Anglo-Boer War, we had a Scottish gentleman who came along for 2 years to stop the hunting and poaching. He fell in love with Africa. 22 years later, he approached the Minister of Lands and requested to increase the size of the park. From the 500,000, he was given an extra 1.5 million, adding on to his property he had to look after. In 1926, His dream was realized to create that little Cinderella into one of the world's best known game reserves, to which millions of people visit these days. And very simply, it is open to all to drive yourself around or to have professional guides, like the owner of Nkosi Tours, who is actually a guide, and Goodman himself will drive you around in an open safari vehicle, knowing where to look for the animals and when to look for them. You can look for them on your own. There are camps, there are restaurants, there are picnic sites, and you have days you can spend looking for animals. Not only do we have the world's greatest game reserve, but Mpumalanga itself, we have facilities and many memorials. There was Samora Machel's memorial, where the Mozambican president crashed into the mountainside. Not only do we have traces of the oldest civilizations on the planet, but we also have the Geo Trail. This geological marvel, a 6-hour journey into the past of 3.5 billion years of the rock structures of our planet, are to be found in the neighborhood of Barberton, one of the first stock exchanges and one of the richest gold mines in the world, Bray's Golden Quarry, going back to 1882. Folks, there is so little that we can't show you in this part of the world.